became just so interested in how the world worked. I was always pretty interested in debating people and discussing ideas. I was a big kind of ideas guy. I thought theories were interesting. It really was just like, whoa, that's so mind blowing when I would learn a new fact or, something I'd read. And I was always kind of interested in that stuff. And just because the people around me kind of weren't in the same field or interested in the same topics, your choices were to either say, well, I'm just going to do what everyone else is doing, or kind of follow that bug. And I got to thank my parents and mainly my mom, who said, you should really follow this. You're so interested in it. You're so passionate in it. And when you have a strong safety net and a strong support net, you have the feeling that you can do whatever you want. You can try whatever you want. And hey, if you get super interested in economics, go for it. Take a deep dive. And if you find something that's, interesting to you or a passion to you, really follow that, because not that many people find something that they're really passionate about and then can pursue it.
Welcome to the Cashflow Fight Club podcast. In the Champions Corner edition, I'm Mike Deaton, and together with Lydia, my co-host in life, business, and this podcast, we're taking you into the training room, deep in the dojo, sharing the secrets of what it takes to forge a champion. We're digging deep into mindset mastery, high-performance habits, best-in-class behaviors, and bringing you the tips and techniques that maximize human potential, brought to you from some of the best in the business.
So grab your buds and your seat. Hit subscribe and get ready to up your game. Let's do the show.
Let's do it. Thank you for joining us for this In the Champions Corner episode. In today's episode, we're focused on the gold, specifically creating cash flow from gold and other precious metals.
This is a fun episode with a young man who's already operating across a broad range of interests.
Benjamin Nadelstein was raised on the East Coast in Martha's Vineyard, and he found his passion in music and the performing arts. And as most pursuing a path in the performing arts, Ben found his way to the West Coast and Los Angeles. Along the way, however, Ben found another passion in economics. His interest sparked during his time in the university. He became infatuated and dove as deeply into the subject as the library and internet would allow. Ben has since joined the team at Monetary Metals and now works on helping educate, communicate, and implement creative ways to make the metal supply chain more efficient, which creates cash flow opportunities for investors like you and me.
We cover so much ground in this episode, and I know you'll come away with a newfound appreciation for how precious metals can be used in your portfolio, as well as great insights into the many ways you can foster your own passion to follow your dreams.
Let's step into the Champions Corner with Ben Nadelstein. All right, Ben Nadelstein, welcome to the Champions Corner. We're so happy to have you on and chat about all things metal and best-in-class behaviors and all that good stuff. So welcome.
Hey, thanks guys for having me. Feels good to be a champion finally. I got a black belt in Taekwondo, but I don't have a cool belt, and so finally a cash flow belt seems very perfect.
Right on, yes. You are in the world of cash flow. I love that. So maybe before we get into that, give us a bit about your background, your history, where you're from, where you came from, all that good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm actually from Martha's Vineyard, if you guys know where that is. It's a small island off the coast of Massachusetts. We've got some pretty big names who, live there, vacation there, summer there. I'm a year-rounder. I'm an islander. People say anything off the island is off island. And so, you guys are on the mainland. I'm on the island. And so, yeah, I came from this kind of very unique background, a very special place. I was just kind of one of those kids who was interested in performing, being on stage, talking a lot, being the center of attention, which obviously hasn't really stopped. And I went to school for music, theater, and communication, which pretty much just blended all the things I loved, which were talking, being on stage, and performing. So I went to UMass Amherst, got a degree in communications with a minor in theater and music, and pretty much from there was set on just kind of following that career path, following that lifestyle, going out to California, being a homeless actor, just like all those other people, kind of following the dream. And, my life took a bit of a turn because I got very interested in economics. I wanted to learn everything I could about the world, how it works. Recently, I was listening to an interesting podcast, and, the host said, a lot of what we do in economics is to ask, and then what, right? So okay, we have this policy, and then what happens, right? It's not just that thing that you immediately see. And other people have kind of said we have to see the seen and the unseen, right? So we cut a ribbon. Oh my God, congrats, there's a new bridge. But, where did all the resources from that bridge come from? And, what things didn't get built because we built a bridge. And that's kind of what economics is all about. That interested me like crazy. And I took a huge pivot from performing on stage and being a vocal jazz singer to doing economics. And so I kind of ended up in a completely different space than I started, and couldn't be happier that I am where I am now.
That's an incredible story. I love it. Back on Martha's Vineyard, like, were you exposed? How did you get involved in, or a desire to have the theater? Was it something you were just pulled to, or your parents in any way in that arena, or how did
Yeah,
that come
so
about?
both my parents have a pretty good ear. My dad has a good ear, and my mom is an incredible singer. She's got a beautiful voice, and she's actually from the Soviet Union. She was born in Lithuania, and not much to do there other than singing. So lots of kind of singing in her background. It's funny, her parents always would kind of shop her around. There'd be a party or something, and there's no TV or not much to do, and so it would be like, hey, Sophia, why don't you go sing for us? So I definitely got the same push when I was a kid. I loved performing. I had a pretty good ear for music. When I was a kid, I was always kind of just like playing around, using a vibraphone or a piano or a trumpet or a trombone. I played every instrument I could get my hands on, the violin, you name it, I played it. I always had a pretty good ear. And obviously, I like being on stage and talking a lot. And so that kind of made its way into something called theater. I did my first musical theater, and I was like, oh, wow, that's awesome. It combines the two things I like, which is singing and theater. And so I kind of ended up finding anything in that niche where I could get some spotlight on me. And I didn't look back until I didn't look back.
That's great. So you went coast to coast, got called to Hollywood, starving artist. That's a great metaphor. It sounds literal in your sense. What was that like? What did you go with? Like, is it the stereotypical, maybe not quite as severe, a penniless, drove across country sleeping in your car, or how was your
So
coast
I
to trip?
did convince a friend who was also interested in kind of the entertainment industry. He was thinking of going to either New York or Los Angeles, and I said, I really don't want to go to New York. It's cold. My family's, kind of like from the New York area. They know New Yorkers. I'm all set. I kind of wanted something new. I'd never been to the West Coast, and I thought it's time to really become a coastal elite and go from coast to coast. I did drive across the country. But one thing that we did purposefully was stopping in a bunch of different cities just to see what life was like. What is life like in Washington, D.C., or Nashville, or New Orleans, or Texas, just to kind of get a different feel of the different cities before I said, hey, I'm definitely settling down in California or wherever I, did want to end up. But I knew I wanted to at least see California and test it out for myself. So my whole thing was I didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't have a strong kind of sense of where I wanted to go. I just knew I didn't want to stay where I was, and I didn't want to kind of stay with the same people, because you kind of get in this bubble, right? Either a thought bubble, a personal bubble. And so I decided, hey, let's just shake things up and head to the West Coast.
And when you say you didn't know what you wanted to do, did you not know what you wanted to do within the performance world, or even more broadly than that? You truly went with an open book.
Well, right as I began to leave and start this journey, I found the company that I work at now. They found me, really. And this kind of started this whole big pivot, right? I had a blank canvas, and there was this kind of different aspect of my life that was really taking hold and starting to paint kind of a different picture than 6 months earlier I would have guessed. Because when I graduated college, I really did have no plan. I mean, I knew I had some talent at performing and talking, but a communications degree, a theater degree, a music degree, those are just kind of great little pieces of paper that you can throw up on your wall and look at sometimes. But they don't really get you in the door anywhere like a big firm or a big company. It's not like most art professionals have some clear pipeline that they just do. And most people end up in a big city and try to make it big. And that was kind of my plan, which in my opinion is no plan. Looking back at it, it's like, what type of plan is that? So I was just starting to kind of change tactics and pivot. And the whole beginning of that started when I said, hey, listen, I have no prospects. I have no ties. I don't have a job yet. I don't have a, career yet. I don't even have a family yet or anything like that. And so right now is a good time to really make that huge pivot. And I went from a performing arts kid to, I guess you can call it an economics nerd. And that kind of slowly grew and grew. So by the time I actually reached California, I was less worried about, getting an audition, and I was more worried about interest rates. And so, yeah, I mean, it was definitely a weird path, and the two kind of worlds in no way touch, right? The people who are interested in Jerome Powell want to know if he's on Broadway, and the people who, can sing some bars from Hello Dolly know pretty much nothing about the Federal Reserve. So I was definitely an odd duck, but I made the pivot.
I hear you. Are you an only child, or do you have siblings?
I've got a brother, and thankfully you guys don't know him yet. He's incredible. He's a total genius. So you are getting the silver standard. He's the gold standard in the family. He's very smart. I give him a huge shout out every time someone asks. He is an engineer, and I jokingly say that he works at a sub shop because he's working on like nuclear submarines or something like that. So very smart kid. Very fun, and a total polymath, which means he can just talk about any subject at an incredibly high level. So if I want to talk about economics, he knows about economics. If you want to talk about history, he can unpack history, philosophy, ethics, engineering, obviously, math, science. He's the man. So Gabe Nadelstein, huge shout out. You will not be the king of the cash flow podcast, though.
Yeah, that's right. Stake your claim.
I do have a question before we dive deep into what you do. What sparked the interest to make a pivot in your career? Were you looking for more stability, or you just really found a huge interest in economics?
Yeah, I got bitten by the bug. I became just so interested in how the world worked. I was always pretty interested in debating people and discussing ideas. I was a big kind of ideas guy. I thought theories were interesting. It really was just like, whoa, that's so mind blowing when I would learn a new fact or, something I'd read. And I was always kind of interested in that stuff. And just because the people around me kind of weren't in the same field or interested in the same topics, your choices were to either say, well, I'm just going to do what everyone else is doing, or kind of follow that bug. And I got to thank my parents and mainly my mom, who said, you should really follow this. You're so interested in it. You're so passionate in it. And when you have a strong safety net and a strong support net, you have the feeling that you can do whatever you want. You can try whatever you want. And hey, if you get super interested in economics, go for it. Take a deep dive. And if you find something that's, interesting to you or a passion to you, really follow that, because not that many people find something that they're really passionate about and then can pursue it. Someone's interested in scuba diving or juggling, and most people go, dude, you can't make a career juggling. But if you have really supportive parents and a strong, social network, people go, you know what, try it. See if you can become the world's best juggler, right? And so I kind of got that ability and that push to say, hey, you've got this bug, obviously. You're passionate about economics, obviously. So why don't you try to follow that dream the same way that they would have said if I was, wanted to be a vocal jazz singer. They would have said, hey, man, you've got this dream. You've got this bug. Like, obviously follow it. And so I was the one with the passion, but the reason I could follow it was definitely because of just a strong support network.
Yeah, that's a thread I wanted to pursue, was your family life. And that's kind of why I was asking if you were an only child or if you had siblings or whatever. But it sounds like your mom, at least, or I haven't heard you mention your dad, but it sounds like your parents were very supportive of you just exploring and trying things. And you had a natural curiosity, but, in some way that was fostered by your parents.
Yeah, and my dad is incredible too, because he at a young age was like, I want to be a dentist. How many kids do you know say, I really want to be a dentist? I want to work in
all of them.
mouths.
Yeah.
Yeah. my kids are just knocking on the door saying, I can't wait to be, foot doctor. I mean, not that many people have these kind of unique passions. And, he's also very creative. He does other things on the side. And I think, the fact that I can see him, run a business, he runs his own business, become an incredible dentist, smart guy, and then also on the side of all these talents, delve into things like real estate or, write a comedy script. And so, he was kind of a inspiring figure in the sense that, oh, you don't have to just be pigeonholed and do one thing. If you're interested in comedy and real estate and entrepreneurship, you can do all three and have a family and not, be a total deadbeat or never show up. You can still be there, still be supportive, and have a bunch of different interests in your life. And so seeing both my parents be entrepreneurs and have these other passions that they still continue to do, still continue to follow, it's just nice to see, because you're like, wow, if they can do it and I'm half of her and half of him, I could probably do it too. And when they're, waking you up in the morning saying, hey, you can definitely do this, and, we'll support you no matter what happens, it makes you want to follow that passion. So I think the biggest kind of privilege anyone can get is having good parents, because, they teach you stuff, they're role models. And also, if things go bad, even if they have no idea what you're talking about, they're going to still support you, care about you, give you a big hug, right? They might not know anything about a tritone, but if you're like, oh my God, I can't figure out this song, they'll say, hey, come on, like let's do something else, take your mind off it. So definitely big support to the parents, and also having a brother. It's like nice to have someone to bounce ideas off of, someone to tell you you're being crazy, and also someone that does have that kind of different role in their life, a different path in their life. Being an engineer is much more structured, right? You go to school, you become engineering school, you take math, you take science, you don't do a bunch of crazy things, and then you become whatever, nuclear submarine tech or something like that. And it's a very kind of stable lifestyle, and I was never like craving that. I was never worried about that. And having kind of people in your life who say, yeah, go try it. I think that's such a privilege.
Yeah, it really is. It's so important. And I don't know the numbers, but I think a lot of people don't have that in their lives with family. I mean, there needs to be a certain, well, first of all, there needs to be a certain personality and a certain mindset that somebody comes into as a parent. But then, life just happens. A lot of parents are struggling to do things, and so and a lot of factors have to line up to have really supportive and encouraging parents, which is great. I would say outside of that, it's good. You've mentioned a couple times a social network. It's good that is something you can largely choose, right? You can choose the people around you and whether they're supportive and encouraging or of a different mindset. And so it is really important.
I think one big thing too is that the social network doesn't need to be alive. I definitely found that when I was reading, economics books. I personally have never met Ayn Rand, and I will never meet her. And Thomas Sowell lives in California. I'll probably never meet him. He's a very old man, but it feels like I know him, right? It feels like I have this network of people who are interested. You can go online and see, oh my God, on Twitter, people are also reading Ludwig von Mises. Okay, that makes you feel not so, separate and alone, because imagine 15 years ago, you're a kid living in, Kentucky, and you're super interested in 18th century ballet. Well, guess what? No one in Kentucky is super interested in 18th
They're
century
playing
ballet.
basketball. Yeah.
Right. If you're not playing basketball, you're kind of one of the weird ones, and that's kind of socially isolating. Maybe you're like, I'll just play basketball. Who cares about this whole ballet thing? But now with the internet, with the power of books and libraries and other kind of networking, you can network throughout space and time, right? So I can feel connected to Thomas Sowell. Oh my God, someone thinks the same way I do. And I can get connected in the past. Oh my God, Ayn Rand had the exact same thing I was thinking, but she just said it so clearly. Oh my God, it feels so nice to have someone who really understands what you're thinking. And so, it's a living social network, right? Your parents, your friends, even people in your school. And then also kind of this extended network as well, which is you can hop on LinkedIn and see, oh my God, there's a whole group of people who are really interested in land flipping. I didn't even realize, that was a thing, right? And so it's nice to have these kind of social networks, but you also kind of want to expand your idea. What is a social network? It doesn't have to be someone who's alive, right? And it doesn't have to be someone nearby.
Yeah, that's a great point. I've heard that often, that, we can have mentors that are virtual mentors that are living or dead. You can have conversations with them. You can do all these things, and the power of social media, when channeled for good, definitely can bolster you and drive greater creativity and success. It can also work in the other direction. So double-edged sword.
Which is in some ways proof of how strong it is, right? Which people get cyberbullied and people feel, oh my God, I'm not as beautiful as whatever, Kim Kardashian. Okay, well, it's not like you're ever going to meet Kim Kardashian. It's not like you're like, oh my God, she's right next door and she's going to the same prom as me.
Yeah.
Right. And yet still people have this effect on them, like, wow, I need to, do my hair a certain way or whatever it may be. And so why not, like you said, kind of channel that power clearly for good and say, hey, I'm going to learn a lot. Oh my God, I can never meet Thomas Sowell, but I can learn everything he's ever written.
Yeah, so intentionality, it's good. So at some point, you went coast to coast. You're in California, and you awakened to the beauty of macroeconomics and how the world works, and it kind of sparked this curiosity in you. What was that? Was there a moment or
There,
something
there
like?
was definitely a series. Yeah, there was a series of moments. So I remember in high school and in college, there was just kind of this slow push. Um, and the real moment was my mom saying, "Hey, you should really investigate this economics thing. You're clearly passionate about it. Why don't you see if there are some jobs, that do economics?" And I was kind of dismissive. I was like, "Mom, listen, you have no idea what you're talking about." No one makes money doing the economics that I was interested in because and I'll explain what I mean by that. When I was starting in high school, I had kind of been going to classes and learning stuff and being interested in things and debating people and, oh, well, what about this, what about that. And I remember we had a certain class where we were kind of analyzing rhetoric, right? So political speeches, rhetoric. We would look at past speeches by dictators or Stalin or Mussolini or whatever, Hitler, and say, okay, what in their speeches was a form of rhetoric? Okay, this wasn't true, or they were kind of trying to push, antagonistic ideas, whatever it may be. And then we took a Republican, a current day Republican, and we analyzed their speech and said, okay, are there any kind of certain similarities here where they're kind of scapegoating people or whatever it may be? And then the next class, we moved on to an entirely different subject. And I was like, well, aren't we going to do the Democratic guy next? Like, wouldn't, shouldn't we like do one of each? And yeah, and at the time, I had no idea about politics. I couldn't tell you anything about it. I couldn't tell you anything. I just knew that, the Democrats were the good guys. Everyone's supposed to vote for Obama. And, but it seems weird. I mean, like, shouldn't we also analyze the other guy's speech? And the teacher said, oh, they don't lie. And I was kind of like shocked by that. I mean, I knew that they were the good guys, obviously, but to say they don't have any rhetoric, to say they don't lie at all, to say that everything they say is, completely above board, I found that kind of weird. And so I don't know, that kind of stuck with me. I was like, that just can't be the case, that we're only analyzing the bad guys. I agreed at the time that they were the bad guys, but it just seemed unfair. And so I wanted to look and see, hey, is there someone else who's, making fun of these people or I don't know, debunking them? And I was just kind of an antagonistic guy. And so somehow on the internet, I stumbled upon Milton Friedman, and the thumbnail in the YouTube video said, Milton Friedman crushes a man's questions like Dixie cups. And I was like, all right, that sounds like a funny title or whatever.
There you go.
Yeah, and so I click it, and this guy comes up to the stage, and Milton Friedman's sitting on this lecture hall stage, and this man walks up and he says, I think there's a real problem with the minimum wage. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I agree with that. There is a real problem with the minimum wage. And he says, it's only, this is a very old video, it's only whatever, $7.50, and it should be much higher. People can't afford to live like this. And I'm like, yeah, he's right. I mean, oh my God, $7. How can anyone live on $7, right? And Milton Friedman goes, I totally agree. There is a very big problem with the minimum wage. And I'm like, okay, this guy seems, pretty reasonable. And then Milton Friedman says, the problem with the minimum wage is that it exists at all. It should be zero. And my brain had like a full blown, what did he just say? I had heard people have a problem with the minimum wage, but only in the direction. It wasn't big enough, right?
Right,
We
yeah.
need way bigger. We need a $50
Quarter here, half a cent there, whatever. Yeah.
Right. No. And people were saying, oh, if we don't have a $20 living wage, this is horrible. And for someone to turn around confidently and say, yes, there is a problem. It's that it exists. It should be zero. I was like, my mind was like, what? Who is this guy? Right. And I listened. I was like, well, he's clearly going to have some weird thing that he's going to say. And that weird thing actually made a lot of sense to me. And I went, that was really weird. I'd never heard someone actually explain not only that the minimum wage shouldn't exist, but that it's harmful to the very people it claims to help. And I thought, wow, that's such a cool point. And I listened to the rest of the video and I was like, wow, that was really interesting. And so the next day I went to school and asked my teacher, who's kind of like the history teacher, I said, hey, did you know that the minimum wage is actually really bad for people who are low-skilled workers? And I explained the whole logic, right? I did the Milton Friedman thing. I said, listen, you would think it's actually helpful, but in reality, it's really hurting. And the teacher looked at me like I had grown another head out of the side of my neck, right? Like she was like, what the heck is wrong with you? And she wasn't interested in what I was saying. she was kind of like, what, this is odd.
Yeah, the course syllabus does not say this at all. I can't teach
No.
this.
And so I kind of left that, non-discussion feeling kind of weird. It's like, that was weird. I mean, wouldn't, if I told you something that you believed was completely not only incorrect, but actually harmful to what you wanted to do, most people would be very interested in that information. And for me, I was so interested in this information and I wanted to learn everything I possibly could. And I was like, oh my God, if this guy Milton Friedman was right about the minimum wage, what else is he right about? So I probably spent 16 hours a day just eyes glued to a screen. I would watch Milton Friedman, and then Milton Friedman would say something about Thomas Sowell. Oh, well, who's that? So then I'd watch every video about Thomas Sowell. And then Thomas Sowell would say, well, I'm, really writing about Hayek. Well, who's Friedrich Hayek? I'd read everything he ever wrote. And so I would just watch these videos and these lectures. The Mises Institute is a huge institute promoting this kind of style of economics, and they had thousands of free lectures. So I read everything on the Mises Institute. Okay, well, what happened over time was that I started learning more things, and people started looking at me even weirder, right? So saying that the minimum wage might not be a great idea is weird. But saying, well, oh my God, inflation is caused by X, Y, Z, and what about, this and that? People are like, dude, what the heck are you talking about? And so in some ways it could have been isolating, right? In some ways it could have been like, you're the only person on Martha's Vineyard who has any interest at all in economics. That could be pretty isolating. But it was actually very empowering because I could go on somewhere like the Mises Institute and see, oh my God, for the last 35 years, people have been interested in the exact topics that I've been interested about. And so that's kind of empowering. And so I kept reading and reading. And over time, I kind of went from one area of economics to a kind of way different area of economics. So I started out kind of reading the Chicago school, which would be Milton Friedman, Thomas Sowell, David Friedman, his son. And then over time, kind of also the Austrian school, which are people like Karl Menger, Böhm-Bawerk, Ludwig von Mises, and Friedrich Hayek. So these are kind of different schools, the same way that like ballet and hip hop are different, but they're both dance, right? And so I kind of ended college with a lot of free time on my hands because of the COVID pandemic. Everyone was going virtual. So I went into the library. I checked out every single book on economics they had. And surprise, surprise, no one else was checking them out. And so, yeah, some of them I would be dusting off.
No wait list for any of them or anything?
Yeah, I remember specifically getting a book by Thomas Sowell. It wasn't Basic Economics, but it was another one of his books. And I think it was maybe Race in Economics. I couldn't remember the name, but just read every book by Thomas Sowell and you'll tell me. And I remember opening the book to see when the last person who checked it out was, and it was in the like 1960s. I was like, what the heck? Right? Like it was so far back that it started with a 19. And this was, in the 2020s. And so I just laughed about that. And I wasn't discouraged. I was more interested. It kind of felt like I was finding this secret knowledge that no one else, wanted to know. And so over time, I became very interested in economics. And my parents obviously could tell because I wouldn't shut up at dinner about, oh my God, did you hear that, tariffs aren't actually good? And if we all had that, right, like people didn't want to hear about tariffs. But my mom, right as I was kind of finishing college and thinking, what am I going to do with my life? She said, you should really look into this economics. And I completely dismissed her. I was like, Mom, nobody in their right mind would pay money to discuss Austrian economics. Nobody. It's like saying, I want to study 13th century Hungarian wood carving. Nobody pays any money doing that, right? You'll never have a real job. You'll never have a salaried position talking about wood carving in the 13th century, right? Even wood carving is a small enough niche. 13th century wood carving, oh my God. So it's the same thing with economics. Paul Krugman is a New York Times author, but not because he's doing good economics. It's because he's doing bad economics, right? And I don't want to do bad economics, so I can't write for the New York Times, right? So my mom said, you shut up. You're not smart. Just go, at least look. Go find something. And I said, all right, I'll go check it out. I'll go look. And so I looked at a couple places who did the economics I like that I'd read, I like this site and maybe whatever. And very long story short, I remember, who I like listening to is this guy, Peter Schiff. Peter Schiff had a cool talk at this mortgage bankers lecture. And he came up and said, you guys are completely missing the boat here. There's a big problem with the Federal Reserve, the way it's working, how interest rates are affecting mortgages. And you guys are having a very dangerous derivatives trading that will lead to a big bust. And I was like, that sounds like the stuff I've been reading. And everyone's laughing at Peter Schiff. What are you talking about? Get off the stage, man. You're a crazy kook. And so I said, okay, I like this guy, Peter Schiff. Let's see if he has a company. So I call up. I just go search online. Peter Schiff has a company. I call up. Okay, great. They say, hey, listen, we just hired someone. So unfortunately, there's not any open positions. But I know of a company that is hiring. Why don't you send over your resume and I'll send it to them? So he sends over my resume. The next day, I get a call from the hiring manager, and he goes, I just read your cover letter. How old are you? And I said, I think at the time I was probably 23. Said, I'm 23. And he said, how have you read all this stuff? How do you know all this stuff about economics? And I said, I'm just really interested in it. So we had a long discussion about me, but then also a long discussion about this company. And that company was Monetary Metals. And that's the company not only that I said yes to, that said yes to me, but I now work at and totally love. So if we want to pivot now to this kind of economics nerd who found a place in a cool company, that company is Monetary Metals.
That's great. Thanks for capturing that insightful and fun journey. And it's the power of a cover letter. Because my next question was going to be, how did your resume pique the interest of somebody in the field of metals and economics? But okay, you use the power of the cover letter to explain, because I mean, I think you said your degree was in communications and maybe some music as well. So,
yep.
All right.
Yeah, that cover letter, I kind of they said, write a cover letter, and I'd never really written a cover letter before. So I wrote down some stuff I liked about economics and I thought was interesting. And I, read, hey, I like this book, and you guys seem to be interested in the same kind of stuff. And that cover letter kind of was the impetus to say, hey, let's call this guy back, because who the heck is this guy, right? And so that call led to kind of me getting on the phone. Once I start talking, obviously that never stopped. So it pretty much never stopped, and here I am talking for Monetary Metals.
Wonderful.
Before we dive into what you do at the Monetary Metals, I really want to commend you for being open to and be curious to explore. I'm reflecting a lot on this, because I think we as people, we filter new information and new concepts, and we want to keep only those that are aligned to what we believe already. And that makes us really closed off to new concepts and to curiosity. And really the result is that we don't grow as humans, and we don't explore, and we don't explore our opportunities that could be ahead of us.
Confirmation bias. Yeah, we seek out that kind of stuff. Yeah, I had the same thought. Inspiring. I had the same thought when you mentioned that, well, who wouldn't want to hear more about some opinion that's different than theirs? And I was like, almost everybody.
Almost everybody.
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, it's definitely a personality trait of mine that I enjoy hearing new ideas. I like getting confronted with facts that don't fit my positions or my opinion. Yeah. I like, discussing and debating. And for a lot of people, that's not, that doesn't make them happy. That doesn't excite them for someone to say, hey, everything you've ever known is completely a lie. And you bring up a point. It is kind of funny. I was like, why does nobody want to discuss this? And the real question should have been, why do you want to discuss this, right? And I think that goes back to a kind of personality thing. Some people are very interested in new ideas and kind of, like you mentioned, being confronted by different possibilities than they thought there were before. And a lot of people get shut down by that. They're like, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to be involved with that. I just want my same cup of coffee. I want to vote for who I vote for. I want to think what I think, and I want to be done with it, right?
Donuts are good. Butter in my coffee. And don't tell me anything differently.
Yeah, and listen, that is totally okay. I think when things work, and this goes back to economics, when things work, they're supposed to be invisible, right? Adam Smith called it the invisible hand, not the highly talked about, often discussing hand. No, it was the invisible hand, right? It just worked without you thinking about it. It was as if an invisible hand was moving these chess pieces, and everything started just kind of working on its own. Versus the very visible hand. Do you guys know how to do anything about electricity? No, you call an electrician. I don't know anything about plumbing. I'll call a plumber, right? There's nothing wrong with that per se. I mean, I think it's just most people don't need to know most things. And that's why we specialize, right? And so I think it is very difficult when you're very specialized to kind of stay in that broader world where people don't find that interesting or don't want to talk about your niche. And when you're in high school, most people don't want to talk about monetary theory. So totally get that. And very happy to kind of end up where people do want to talk about monetary theory.
Yeah, you may be one of the few. I was trying to look up. I couldn't remember the name of the book, but there's a book I read several years ago about this interplay between Friedman and Hayek, and some debates that they had, and gosh, I can't remember. I'll have to think of the name
Yeah,
of it.
send it to me. I'll read it. I'll read it for next time.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it's good stuff.
All right. Do you want to tell us more about monetary metals?
Absolutely. So let's jump into kind of a broad overview of gold first, because most people are like, I have a very cursory understanding of metals. So let's start even with the name, monetary metals. What does that mean, right? You've heard of copper, that's a metal, steel, that's a metal, right? Like all these things are metals, but what's a monetary metal? So monetary obviously has money in the root, and monetary metals are gold and silver. There's not just one, there's actually two. And there's a specific reason for that. So over time, when humans first met at marketplaces and bazaars and we were kind of trading and barter, it was super inefficient, right? You wanted butter, I had, a cane. Okay, how many canes is a butter worth, right? Like things like that. I wanted to send you a chicken. Okay, but really this is only worth half a chicken, so you can't slice it in half. That's not really helpful, right? So barter has a lot of these kind of inefficiencies. And so over time, people realized certain goods were really good for barter because they had a lot of interesting qualities to them. For example, you could cut it up, right? You could divide it, divisibility, and it wouldn't lose any value. So if you cut a cow in half, okay, that's not really worth anything, right? But if you cut butter in half, no problem, right? Okay, half butter is worth as much as two. Okay, some other problems. Well, butter over time is going to soil, right? Like you can't just leave butter out in the sun. That's not so great. You can't leave fish out. That's going to rot. So things that actually soiled over time or rotted over time, those weren't so great. Metals that corroded over time or through water, those weren't so great either. And so all these kind of different traits about divisibility, durability, all these different traits over time made gold and silver very desirable to trade, which means you took a very small loss when you traded gold for something, right? And so over time, people kind of had this network effect where gold and silver were chosen as the money. Now, why two, right? Why not just gold? Well, the reason is because for very small transactions, gold's really not that great. Because if I'm like, hey, I just want to buy, a cheeseburger. Okay, well, you're going to have to slice off such a small amount of gold for the value of a cheeseburger. You might lose the gold. It's going to get lost in your lint. Oh, some wind blew it away. That's not so great, right? And also for very big transactions, let's say you want, to buy a house. Silver, which is the other monetary metal, isn't so convenient. You're going to have like so many coins of silver that it's like, what, you got to get a whole cow to bring over the silver. It's not so great, right? So for small transactions, silver was the best money. You took the smallest loss. You could pay for a hamburger in silver and you don't have to shave anything. You can just pay with a coin, right? And for big transactions, gold was the best because you could just have one gold coin and that could pay for an entire house, right? So over time, there's two monetary metals, one for small transactions, one for big transactions. We built our entire economies based on money, right? And it was invisible, which is really cool because the invisible hand, you just kind of trade with it. Every transaction has money on the other side, which is kind of interesting. And over time, people who were bad in the government realized, wait a minute, we can totally screw with this system. We can shave off some gold content and replace it with a cheaper metal, right? In Rome, they started doing that, which in some part led to the collapse. And in other areas, of course, they started shaving off the coins because the coin's like this, and you can kind of shave off some of it. And, no one's really the wiser when you hand over a coin. So actually, if you see on coins, in gold coins pictures, or even some coins today, there's those little ridges on the side. And the interesting historical note is that those ridges were actually put in place as anti-stealing measures. Because if you give me a coin and you try to shave off some of the side, then I'll notice, wait a minute, some of those ridges are shaved off, right? So it's kind of a mechanism over time for trying to make sure that the gold ounces that you were getting were actually the full amount. And then, of course, over time, government said, well, we're going to stamp coins to make sure that they're official and legal tender. And so government and money kind of started to have these interplay together, which they didn't initially, right? Money didn't come from the government. It came from trading. But over time, the government said, hey, we're going to make sure we're in charge of this whole money operation. Obviously, a bit oversimplified, but for purposes of this discussion, in 1971, that relationship between gold and money broke down because our government, the US government, was redeeming paper dollars for ounces of gold. And that's actually why gold price was fixed, which is, again, a government kind of machination into money, where we said $1 is worth 35 ounces or 25 ounces, right? And so that was a price fixing scheme, which, if you know anything about economics, never work. And so the French were deciding, hey, we're going to start redeeming our paper dollars for physical ounces of gold because dollar bills are redeemable in ounces. And Nixon, with the help of Milton Friedman, actually, who is a pretty free market guy, decided, hey, instead of just kind of cheating everyone and saying, hey, a dollar is not really going to be worth $35 an ounce. It's going to be worth, let's say, $30 an ounce, and just kind of stealing from everyone a little bit. They decided, you know what, we're going to cut this system entirely into. Gold is now no longer going to be redeemable in dollars. So what does that mean? If you are a holder of a piece of paper called a dollar and you slide it over to the window, we're going to say checking or savings, right? We're not going to say, okay, here's your, gold ounces back. And so what that did is it disconnected the money, gold, from the currency, the dollar. And so since 1971, there's been a complete disconnect between currencies, dollars, euros, yen, and money, which is gold and silver. So that means that governments can borrow as much dollars as they want. And of course, in general, governments are going to borrow way more than they can actually tax and fund their debts. So big problem. What is monetary metals doing? Monetary metals is saying, hey, gold and silver are money. They still are. And money should earn a return. What does that mean? A return is just like something you get by lending or loaning any other instrument, right? You take some risk and you get some reward back. So beforehand, before monetary metals, gold had no return. That was kind of the shiny pet rock. Oh, it just sits there. It does nothing, right? You got to pay to store it. What's the point of owning this asset? And those things were all true. What monetary metals does is we allow owners of gold and silver, the monetary metals, to lease or loan out their gold in exchange for a return paid in ounces of gold, which is just like what we used to do in the gold standard, right? I gave you my coin, you wanted to do some business, you earned more coins, and you gave me my coins back plus some return. So we're doing the same thing in monetary metals. We have two different opportunities for clients. One is called a lease, where you rent out your physical gold, and the other is called a gold bond, where you loan out your physical gold. They're different products, so they have different risks and therefore different returns, and different products have different clientele associated. So gold bonds are only for accredited investors, and gold leases are open to anybody, right? And so what monetary metals is doing is just trying to get that return and financing cycle in gold restarted, right? Because in dollars, yens, and euros, people are trading it, using it as a medium of exchange. They're financing businesses. They're earning a return in it. You get an income, but it's all denominated in currency. And the problem with currency is that it has no real backing, right? It's irredeemable. They can print as much currency or borrow as much currency as they want. They can devalue the currency every single year, as they do. And there's pretty much nothing you can do about it. You can't say, well, I'm taking my dollar bills home with me, and that doesn't really do anything, right? But in a gold standard, that actually does matter. In a gold standard, if you take your interest-bearing instrument out of the banking system, that's a loss to the banking system, right? They can't say, oh, well, we're going to keep making loans. They actually have to contract their credit. And so there's a kind of interesting dynamic on the incentives. There's a marginal floor and a marginal ceiling on interest rates that just doesn't exist today with the Fed. As you guys know, in the land business, you're worried about interest rates because one year they can be 5%, the next year they can be 0%, and that matters a lot to your bottom line. And the reason they can do that is because we kind of have a Soviet planning board deciding what interest rates are, right?
Careful, that's dangerous words you're using there.
Yeah, but it's true. My whole half of the family is from the Soviet Union, and they had czars who decided, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. And, they decided grain output and industrial capacity and all these things. And everyone in America laughs at those people. Oh, those guys are such idiots. Like, of course you can't plan grain production. It's so silly. What, they're going to tell people how much food to make? In, America, we don't tell people how much food to make, and nobody starves. If anything, we're too fat, with too much food, right? There's different options and all these different things. But the one thing we took from the Soviets was interest rate policy. We're like, whoa. People can't set their own interest rate policy. That is insane, which, of course, is what we've been doing for thousands of years. And so there's this kind of interesting, monetary experiment happening at monetary metals where we're actually saying, hey, if you want to give us 10 ounces of gold, which is the minimum to open an account, we will offer you opportunities in our marketplace to earn a return. And that's kind of the beginning workings of an actual gold standard where industry, businesses are financed in gold and silver, and then return is paid in ounces of gold and silver. And so you can see there's kind of this small economy starting to build and grow. And so if you want, you can totally check out of the system and say, hey, I'm going to have my capital and my income all denominated in ounces. And so that's kind of a very interesting opportunity for people who say, you know what, I'm done with the funding of the federal government and taking a check from someone that I know will never be able to repay it. And so that's what we're offering. We're offering a way for people to earn an honest return in honest money.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, I know we've had a previous call on this, and so we know a little bit more than the audience, I would imagine. But you guys are solving industry relevant problems, right, on the supply side and the consumption side. And I think the analogy you used with us was mining operations who are actually extracting metals out of the ground and having then to run their operations in a totally different currency, as well as people that use the end product, like jewelers and even these days electronics companies and those kind of things. And so I come from the world of supply chain and operations, and there was a movement, I don't know, decades ago to outsource the middle of the supply chain, right? These third-party logistics providers and warehouses and hubs, and they would consign your inventory, right? We'll buy your inventory, we'll call it off as you need it. And so unplug essentially from the input and the output and just run the operations in the middle. And then that runs off of some level of fees, right? So it sounds like that's an approach that Monetary Metals is taking, where you're kind of taking over the middle of the supply chain, which causes pain for both the providers of the metals as well as the purchaser of the metals. You're able to then run that more freely, as well as you say, allow opportunities for people like us and the audience to plug into it and earn some returns off of it. And you're just working with the fees, right? So the price of gold or silver can go up or down indiscriminately. It doesn't really impact any of the players in the middle. Or the end users, quite frankly, right? I mean, they're if the price of gold goes up, they're passing it on to the consumer, as well as the fees in the middle, right? So it's kind of all of that is running on an independent supply chain, if you will, or so, which is really a fascinating way to go about it. Although not so surprising, because a lot of different supply chains run that way. So why not metals? And
yeah, and the point you bring up, which is so interesting, right, is that if you think about someone's balance sheet, it would be very confusing to have one side of the balance sheet, the asset side, be written in Chinese, and then the English on the liabilities. You'd be like, what? Why shouldn't we just match the two so that they're like written in the same language, right? And so for a gold miner, for example, in a gold bond, they have an asset that is gold, but then they have a liability, which is from a bank usually in dollars or euros or yen. And it's like, we got to translate this gold, through price into something that we can convert to pay our liability, which means price risk, right? You got to translate this gold asset, which no bank wants gold. They want to get paid in dollars or yen, right? And so that price risk is really an existential risk to this company. So when Monetary Metals comes in and says, hey, you have a liability denominated in ounces of gold that matches their asset to their liability. It's like English to English, gold to gold, asset to liability, right? And in a lease, like you mentioned, where you're renting that inventory as a business, that business isn't in the field of trying to guess the gold price. Ooh, I'm a jeweler, but I really think the price of gold's going to go up. No, because then you'd be running a hedge fund, or you'd sell your entire operation and just bet on the price of gold. What they're doing is trying to make jewelry or solar panels or recycling, right? They're doing something, but gold or silver is stuck in the middle of that process, either as work in progress or as inventory, right? A ring has to just sit and be inventory. And so for them, they don't want to take price risk. They're not in the business of betting on the gold price. They're in the business of jewelry or recycling or minting or manufacturing. And so what Monetary Metals does is, like you said, we take that inventory or that work in progress, and we'd say the title is now owned, the gold is now owned by a client of Monetary Metals. The title is with a client of Monetary Metals. And the fee, instead of being denominated in dollars, like a rental fee, usually, from a tenant or someone borrowing your car, is usually denominated in dollars. But for these businesses, the rental fee is denominated in ounces of gold at a fixed interest rate. And that's because they want it to be denominated in ounces of gold, because like you mentioned, when the price goes up, their rental fee is increased in ounces, right? But their jewelry or their end product is also selling for more. Same for when the price goes down. And if their price doesn't move or goes sideways, great. They are now price agnostic. Whereas before they had to run their business constantly either dealing with futures on the price of gold or in some other way tying up, working capital on their inventory and just hoping, well, we're going to take a cut on this. And so now that price risk is gone. There is now a hedge-free financing option. And so for that benefit, for that hedge-free financing option, companies are happy to pay a rental fee, and it's denominated in something that they want to pay it in, right? They want to pay in ounces of gold. And then for the gold owner, the client who owns the title to that metal in the lease, they're earning a rental fee anywhere from 2 to 5% interest paid in ounces. So again, you have 100 ounces. At the end of the year, you could have 105 ounces, right? Regardless of price. And then in bonds, someone is going to take your gold, right? They'll sell it for dollars to finance that operation. And when that operation gets gold out of the ground, you get your capital back plus whatever that interest rate would be. So let's say at a 5%, 10%, or 15% interest rate, 100 ounces would be 105, 110, or 115 ounces. And again, that's a risk reward thing, right? For some people, whoa, I don't want my gold being sold. I always want inventory reporting and monitoring and insurance and all this stuff. Great. That's probably a lease for you. If you're saying, hey, listen, I'm already investing in mining companies. This is actually maybe a bit safer, maybe a better option for my risk return. I'll do a gold bond, right? Higher returns, up to 19% in our last gold bond. But of course, there's a different risk there. So it's just a way to really coordinate production. And that's something beautiful about economics. It's all about coordination, right? You want something and I find a way to give it to you at the cheapest price. That's just coordination, right? It's like, hey, man, I really have all this empty space in my garage. Oh, I'd love to rent your garage space. Well, great. We just coordinated that, right? That's really awesome. And so economics, markets, free markets are all about coordination, and monetary metals has found a way to just coordinate between people who have gold and want to return on it instead of paying to store it, and businesses that want to rent or loan gold. And it's like, great, we'll be the market maker in between. We'll take a cut of that interest rate that we charge either a lessee or someone loaning gold. And then we'll say net of fees, a gold owner can earn anywhere from 2 to 19% interest and, pick and choose their opportunity. And so that's just the beauty of marketplaces, is that they just connect people, right? If you don't want to do it, you can opt out. If you say, hey, listen, I don't want to do a lease in, Ohio, or I hate jewelry companies, great, no need. Versus something like today's modern banking, there's really two main issues. One is that there's no transparency when you deposit $100,000 at Chase or whatever. Where does that money go? They don't tell you. They don't say, oh, well, we're investing in a mortgage-backed security and we're investing in ESG funds. And no one comes out and says, oh, here's what we're investing in. And you certainly do not have the option to say, I don't want to invest in, green funding of, solar panels or whatever it may be. You just get what you get and you don't get upset. And the interest rates are, of course, terrible, right? They can be in the 0.01%. Yeah. Versus something in gold, no person would ever say, you know what, for 0.01% interest, I'll put my gold out on a lease. Most people would not do that, right? So you need to offer some rate. And then, of course, the other big issue with banking institutions is duration mismatch. They take your short-term funding, which is like, hey, this is a demand deposit. I can ask this back any minute. And then they fund 30-year treasuries. There is no mathematical way that will ever work out, right? Hey, I'm going to borrow your car for a day, and then I take your car and give it to someone who's going to be using it for the next 30 years. That's impossible. That will never work. That will just absolutely never work, right? And so that's what modern banking is. Modern banking is duration mismatch. And, monetary metals is not a bank. We're not, we don't get regulated like a bank because we're not a modern bank. We do things the correct way, which is matching, durations and making sure that the risk return spectrum is viable so that customers in the marketplace say, hey, I actually want to do this, right? A client says, you know what, 5% interest on gold, that's good for me. And a business says, you know what, at a 7% interest rate, I think I can make this business operate. So in my opinion, economics is beautiful because it matches people, it coordinates production. And that's why I found monetary metals so beautiful, is because you find people on one side who have this business need for gold and silver. You have clients who own gold and silver and want that return. You connect them for a fee and you're like, wow, there's now kind of a whole gold standard ecosystem brewing. And for those who want to join, we're happy to have you.
Yeah, in the language of economics, right? The marketplace works more efficiently because things are matched up, and buyers and I guess the origins of the supply chain. So the miners and the jewelers aren't worried about stockpiling to hedge against a price up or down swings, and they aren't also running their supply chain too lean so that you run out, right? So they can just focus on their value add opportunities and do things there. I want to be
Which,
mindful
by
of
the
your
way,
time.
is
I know you have a hard stop here coming up, not too long, but so I'm going to enter into like a speed round with you to if I can do this. I may not be intelligent enough to ask the right questions, but you mentioned so monetary metals. They offer two products. One is a lease, and the other, forgive me,
is a bond.
Is a bond. Okay, and so the leasing arrangement. Let's just kind of quickly maybe summarize what that is: duration, min investment, typical return profile.
Absolutely. So it's 10 ounces of gold to become a client of Monetary Metals, or the equivalent, which would be 1,000 ounces of silver, or around $20,000 right now.
So I can either give it to you or I can purchase it.
Yep, you can ship us the gold you already have, or you can actually just wire us funds and we'll buy gold for you. Again, all physical gold, right? And then in a lease, the duration is usually 1 year with an opportunity to roll, which means you just get to do the same lease again. The interest rates range from 2 to 5% interest paid in equivalent ounces. So silver to silver, gold to gold. Again, if you have 100 ounces earning 2%, that's 102 ounces at the end of your lease, regardless of the gold price. And then for leases, there is, of course, different risks associated. So the title of the gold remains with you, the same way that the title of a rental car remains with the rental car company, right? The gold doesn't go on the balance sheet of the company leasing it. It's not an asset that could satisfy creditors. There's inventory reporting, different insurance options. And so it's a different type of risk than something like a gold bond, which I'll run through quickly now. Gold bonds can range in their time, so they can be longer than 1 year. The interest rates are higher because there's a different risk. Your gold is sold for dollars, and then you are now paid back in gold that's taken out of the ground, plus that interest rate. So again, different risks because at some point your gold is sold for dollars. The returns on a gold bond can range anywhere from 5% to 19%. Our last gold bond paid 19% interest. And again, that just matters on risk, jurisdiction, things like that. And then gold bonds, like I mentioned, can be in different time frames, so it can be much longer than 1 year. And only accredited investors are able to invest in a gold bond. If you don't know what an accredited investor is, you can go online. Actually, they might be even changing what counts as an accredited investor, so just keep up to date on what that actually counts as. But anyone can do a gold lease. You just need 10 ounces of gold, 1,000 ounces of silver, or the dollar equivalent to sign up to become a client of Monetary Metals.
And on the bond side of things, that exists in a purely paper format, right? You're not owning the gold, or am I incorrect on that?
So you do own the gold, and again, all the ounces paid to you are again in physical ounces, which you own. The only difference is that the initial capital amount of gold is sold for dollars. So it's sold for dollars, but the return is still paid in ounces of gold. So
okay, so I would wire in $100,000. I would get the equivalent of $100,000 in gold on my balance sheet. I would agree on a term, let's say 3 years, and then over the course of that 3 years, I'm accruing some kind of an annual interest rate, and then at the end of 3 years, I get the equivalent of 100,000 plus whatever my interest accrued over that is. Okay.
Yep, and again, so the gold price could have changed, right? So in dollar terms, you might
Right.
have less dollars, but you will absolutely have, assuming the investment goes well, you will have more ounces of gold. And again, no one's giving financial advice. We're just kind of explaining how it all works. And the one kind of thing to mention on both of those is that if you wanted to redeem your gold physically, totally possible. So let's say you said, hey, you know what? I earned 50 ounces of gold interest in the last 5 years. I would like to either redeem in part or, fully all of my ounces, or just, let's say 7 ounces. That is totally fine. We'll ship you those ounces in any globally recognized Boolean product. Just be aware that in the actual leases and the bonds, you're getting paid in pool gold. It's called allocated pool gold. It's just the most liquid form of gold versus something like a coin or a bar. That's not the most liquid form. A jeweler can't say, hey, I'm going to use this gold bar and turn it into a necklace, right? So just be aware that there's
You
different...
mean not in a state of matter, in a liquid state, but in a ease of transferability into currency, or ease of in and out, let's say. Yeah.
Yeah, and so if you're coming in with a gold bar or a gold coin, that's totally fine. You might even get more ounces of pool gold when it's melted down. And then on the way out, if you wanted, an actual bar coin, of course, those premiums are going to apply. So just people are aware, oh my God, wait, I have like a necklace at home. Can I ship that in? No, that's not a globally recognized bullion product. But if you said, oh my God, I have a gold eagle, I have, a Krugerrand, you can definitely send those in because those are globally recognized bullion products. And then if you want them on the way out, you can get, a Krugerrand or an eagle. The one thing I'd mention is that, that's not going to be the exact same coin because gold and silver are fungible. The same way that if you put dollars into an ATM and then they spit out 5 days later, you're probably not getting the exact same dollars that you put in. Most people are totally fine with that, and that's why money tends to be fungible.
Got it. Now we're entering into a danger zone, NFTs and fungibility. But okay, so hopefully we've piqued some interest into the world of precious metals. And as we've discussed prior, I think it'll be fun to have a matchup with you and some other asset class, maybe black gold or something else. But we'll do that another time where we can get into the ins and outs of the actual investment, the risk profiles, and all that stuff. But this was also to get to know you as I think a very interesting person. My memory has jogged a little bit since we've been speaking, and it's Keynes and Hayek is the book that I was reading on. The something of knowing, the gift of knowing, or something like that. It was a book about debate. It was very dry reading. So probably not a lot of people.
Sounds like something I'd like. All right,
right up your alley. But Ben, for anybody that is interested in metals already and wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way?
Absolutely. monetary-metals.com is the website. If you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, it's Benjamin Nadelstein. Happy to have a chat anytime. You can just book a call, we can chat, or you can DM me and ask any questions. And then monetary-metals.com is the website. We've got a YouTube channel if people want to hear more about me talking on the Gold Exchange podcast. I host them. We ask interviews and expert questions and all that stuff. And then, of course, if anyone wants to learn more, there's tons of books on economics. Anything that you can read by Thomas Sowell, I absolutely recommend. Just start there. Basic Economics is a fun, dry one, but you'll leave knowing anything. And if anyone wants to know what I'm currently reading, which I'm sure nobody does, it is The High Cost of Free Parking by Donald Shoup, all about how free parking is actually very insidious. So if anyone's a super nerd and wants a recommendation, I highly recommend that.
We're outraging a lot of people now. How can parking free?
I'll have to come on. Maybe you guys will get Donald Shoup on the next one to explain.
Right on. Okay, Ben. Well, I appreciate your time and fascinating journey you've had. All the best to you. And we'll look forward to having you on another episode where you can duke it out and show the ins and outs of creating great cash flow from gold and silver. But thanks again for coming on the show.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
For those of you joining us today, we hope you enjoyed this time in the Champions Corner as much as we did. Got some awesome takeaways, and most importantly, will take action to continue living your best life and maximizing your potential. Mindset is such an important aspect of life, and when coupled with action, delivers undeniably powerful results.
Please subscribe to the podcast to hear from more great guests and get the latest mindset mastery insights and cash flow matchups.
Again, thank you so much for investing your time with us, and we look forward to seeing you next time on the Cash Flow Fight Club podcast.